Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Good Dram Show for 2015. So, I'm back. Christmas is long gone, as is New Year's Eve and all that kind of stuff, so time to get back to episodes of the show. And this week we're going to be looking at bourbon again. I know I've done a number of episodes of the show on bourbon, but you know, why not? Let's do another one. As you probably know, that there's the bourbon whiskey industry is dominated by a handful of sort of big names, large companies, and they either, as in the case of say Heaven Hill for example, produce all of their different bourbons at the same distillery. They use maybe different mash bills, different aging techniques, things like that, and then you have other companies that just own a number of different distilleries and produce obviously the individual bourbons at the individual distilleries. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at two of those companies that do both of those things, and you may or may not know of the brands that we're going to sort of look at this afternoon, but hopefully by the time you finish this episode of the show you certainly will do. So we're looking at two of the brands from the Heaven Hill distillery and from Brown-Forman. With regards to Heaven Hill, we shall be looking at the Elijah Craig, and from Brown-Forman Company we'll be looking at Old Forester. So basically a bit of both these are very historic old brands. Elijah Craig, I believe, was or certainly the 12-year-old, which we'll be looking at, was first introduced in 1986, and I believe was the first small batch bourbon to be released. And since then, obviously, no end of different distilleries do small batches and things like that. Elijah Craig himself, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, how bourbon industry, probably more so than any other industry, is kind of littered with these sort of like famous personalities, and Elijah Craig is one of the big ones, who was apparently a Baptist preacher from Virginia, and in 1782 purchased 1,000 acres in Fayette County and planned a town called Lebanon. In 1790 that town was renamed Georgetown. So and then in 1789 he built a distillery there. Obviously, you build a town, you want to build a distillery, don't you? And it's believed that he was the inventor of the bourbon whiskey. It was him that decided what it was going to be made from, the corn mash bill, the aging and new charred oak, things like that. Now, of course, this is all open to debate, but at the end of the day, sort of history from that period of time wasn't necessarily particularly well documented. So obviously, a lot of hearsay and things like that is where we get the information today. But anyway, the Heaven Hill distillery itself was founded in 1935 after the repeal of Prohibition. It carried on until 1996, when the original distillery was destroyed by fire. Apparently, I was reading one of it, said whiskey barrels exploded and shot across the sky like shooting stars. I mean, that's pretty grim if you own a distillery and you're just watching your production go up in flames. But anyway, in 1999 they apparently bought the old Bernheim distillery, and they've been trucking on ever since. So today we will be looking at obviously the Elijah Craig 12-year-old, and we'll be looking at probably the oldest age statement bourbon that I've certainly come across. I mean, when they released, they released an 18-year-old, they released a 21-year-old, and they claim to have some of the oldest stock of bourbons in barrel. I can't imagine there's an awful lot left in the barrels, but this was the release from, or this one I should say, the release from late last year of the 23-year-old. I think it was a single barrel, and it was bottled at 45%, whereas the standard 12-year-old is bottled at 47%. So 23 years in a barrel. That's going to be pretty woody, I reckon. So anyway, that's the Heaven Hill pair. That's the Elijah Craig. So let's move on to the Brown-Forman pair then. Cursed by the flames behind your eyes. Right. Okay. So Brown-Forman. Probably more well known for being the owners of Jack Daniels, and I imagine that's where they get sort of the majority of their cash from. We're looking at the Old Forester bourbon, which I believe for the first time last year was given the distribution rights, or a distribution in the UK. I don't think it had been previously available outside of America, so we'll be looking at that one. It has obviously the standard bottling has no age statements, bottled at 86% proof, or 50% ABV. It's made from a mash of fairly high rye content mash, 72% corn, 18% rye and 10% malted barley. The second bottling I'll be looking at is the 12-year-old, which they call the Birthday Bourbon, and I think it's a small batch that's produced. Well, it might not be produced every year, but it's certainly produced every now and again. I think it was first introduced in 2010, I think. This is from 2012, and apparently similar mash bill, except that on this particular occasion they used 2% more malt in this. The interesting thing about the Old Forester name is that it's allegedly, there's a lot of allegedlys when it comes to bourbons, because nobody really knows, but it claims to be the longest running production bourbon and was first produced in 1817, which is quite surprising that it's only now just actually got this side of the pond, shall we say. It was allegedly, again, named after one Dr. William Forester, who apparently prescribed it for medicinal purposes. So, and I believe it was one of the first bourbons to actually have the cap sealed. It was unlike the Elijah Craig. It was originally sourced by Brown-Forman from two other distillers in Kentucky, one John Arthurton and one Ben Mattingly. But then apparently, like a lot of distilleries in Scotland, or a lot of, should we say, blending companies in Scotland, then decided to sort of, like, you know, make sure that they could get their hands on the raw material, and consequently bought Mattingly's distillery in 1902. Interesting enough, when I was doing the research for the show, I came upon an article, I think, that was dated September last year, and saying that apparently Brown-Forman plans to actually open a new distillery called the Old Forester Distillery in West Main Street, Louisville, which is otherwise known as Whiskey Row. So lots of things still happening in good old Kentucky, and I think that's probably enough waffle. So so let's taste some bourbon then, shall we? Okay, so let's kick off with the Elijah Craig 12-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Now that's a nice nose. It's for sort of a traditional corn heavy mash. It's got it's not overly sweet. It's got a nice crisp, gentle rye kind of spice. Quite dusty. It's obviously got some age to it. Quite herbal. Not overly oaked in actual fact, which is quite surprising. I mean, I've tasted obviously younger bourbons than this that tend to sort of show an awful lot of creamy oak, but it's all quite nicely sitting in the background, and it's. I imagine that. Well, what's the rye content? Rye content, I would guess, is probably not going to be larger than about 8 or 10%, but it really kind of punches above its weight, and it's got lovely spiciness and intensity and And although, like I said, it doesn't have a lot of the creamy oak, it does have quite a bit of sort of tannins, a bit of woodiness, a bit of coffee. And for 12 years old, yeah, it's got quite a little bit of a bite to it. So, Palate. Whoa, that's a dry and spicy finish. That's a real hit. Again, quite woody, quite a bit of tannin, really intensely spicy, but lovely balance to it. You get a little bit of the sort of toasted toffee corn, a little bit of oat, and quite a lot of the rye character, although, like I was saying, the rye is obviously, you know, it's a fairly low rye content mash bill that they use, but it certainly does seem to sort of punch well and truly above its weight. Quite dry. I think it's a style that you kind of have to like. It's not a sort of soft, easygoing kind of bourbon. It's got some character. It's got some grip. It's got some bite to it, and some tannins as well. So yeah, tannins at 12. The hell's it going to have at 23? That's all I can say. But that's good. I really like it. That's a very, very good bourbon. Right, okay, and on to the 23-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Oh, that's got some age. You can really smell the maturity of this. It's got a almost kind of armagnac-y kind of dried fruits, a bit of prune, dried apricot, dusty violets, and my God, you can smell the tannins, I can tell you that. There is a hell of a lot of them. It's really woody, but that soft, spicy rye note is just absolutely gorgeous. And it's like the 12-year-old, the rye is a lot more dominant than you would expect it to be. Again, the sort of creamy oak, the corn is all sort of way down. It's all sort of, you know, playing kind of second fiddle, I suppose, to the spice, the tannins, and the rye. But this is going to be drying, I can tell you that. Palate. Whoa, that's a bitter finish. Lots of bitter chocolate, dark, 100% cocoa. But it's got some nice moist, treacly kind of notes, which kind of sort of counterbalance that. But yeah, it's dry, it's woody, really intense. It's got such a lovely sort of dried fruit character. Again, sort of like slightly armagnac-y, like pruny. A little bit of raisins, but it's got some moist sweetness to the fruit. Again, quite dusty. Like I say, no getting away from the tannins on that one, and it has quite a bitter chocolate finish, really intense. But wow, that it's soft as well. It's not kind of like it's intense. It's not intense in the kind of like the George T. Stagg grab you by the throat and sort of like go kind of at you. It has a sort of soft intensity, and although, like I said, very woody and lots of bitter chocolate, there is a balancing sweetness of fruit that balances it. And yeah, I like that. I think that's really impressive. Right, on to the Old Forester then. So this is a proper high rye content bourbon, so let's see what the nose gives us. It's very soft. It's It's got a little bit of an edginess to it, but the caramel kind of corn character is a lot more dominant. I mean, yes, there definitely is some obvious spicy rye, a little bit of herbalness, which kind of like gives you an indication of youth. A little bit of sweet violet, a little bit of tannin, a little bit of earthiness. I mean, it's not bad. It's pleasant enough. Pretty sort of standard stuff, really, it has to be said. Yeah, pleasantly balanced. It's not too bad a bourbon, it has to be said. Pal? There's a pleasant degree of youngish herbal rye. Bitters quite a lot on the finish, so you get some real bitter coffee, you know, dark over stewed bitter coffee. But it kind of like sort of kicks off a little bit with, like I said, the herbally rye. Then you get sort of like the corn fatness, the toffee, the slight sort of toasted toffee. And then it sort of bitters quite a lot at the finish, and it doesn't quite have the sweetness of fruit that, say, the 23-year-old Elijah Craig had. Obviously, it's nowhere near that kind of age, but it doesn't quite have the sweetness to sort of balance up that real bitter finish. Yeah, it's not too bad, I don't think. It's pleasant enough. Certainly, it's a lot better than some bourbons that I've tasted, but. On this tasting evidence, I think I would probably prefer to go with the Elijah Craig, but still not bad bourbon. Right, okay, on to the 12-year-old. It's probably a little bit unfair of me kind of comparing that, being that it's a lot younger, obviously, than 12 years old. I guess that's probably 5-6-year-old spirit in that, along with younger 3-year-old spirit, I would imagine. But anyway, this is probably more of an apt comparison with the 12-year-old, and this is bottled at, probably didn't mention, this is bottled at 48.5, so let's see where the nose gives us then, shall we? Obvious similarity to the no age statement. A little bit dustier, a little bit more violet, a little bit more rye. It's got more of an edge to it. Although again, the sort of like the oak is quite dense, but not overly sort of full. It's kind of again sitting back. Some corn notes, a little bit of sort of toasted toffee. It's mellow, again it's pleasant. Doesn't quite have the intensity of the Elijah Craig, but you know, it's I think it's a pleasant nose. Palate. Again, that's got quite a bitter finish, and like the no age statement, doesn't really kind of have the fruit sweetness to kind of compensate for that real bitterness at the finish. It opens up quite nicely with probably more of the corn character in actual fact. A little bit of sort of the burnt toffee. I'm certainly getting a lot of burnt toffee now on the finish. The rye again comes through nicely. It's quite herbal still, not overly spicy, more herbal than sort of outright spicy, but a real bitter finish. You know, that sort of overstewed coffee, dark chocolate, and it again just doesn't quite have the sweetness, whether it's kind of treacly, licoricey kind of sweetness or fruit sweetness that I would like to see to sort of just balance up that real intense bitterness. But you know, again, in saying that, it's not a bad bourbon at all. It's you know, pretty enjoyable. I just think it's just you know, that the large Craig just slightly edges it, I think. Right. Okay. So let's sum this up then. I think I pretty much summed it up almost. But anyway, summing up properly, I like the Elijah Craig. I like the intensity. I like the sort of the dark, chocolatey character, and I think the balance is pretty impressive. Certainly the 23-year-old. I must admit, when I was offered an allocation of it, I did kind of like think, well, 23 years, you know, that could be way too woody and bitter, and I turned it down. And then I obviously tasted it for the whiskey magazine, and wished I hadn't turned it down, to be honest with you, because it's impressive for, you know, for something that's spent that long in Kentucky in the warmth, and you know, it's still pretty drinkable, which is absolutely amazing when you think about it. But yes, I like the Elijah Craig. I've always liked the 12-year-old. I think that's always been a, you know, a really reliable go-to bourbon at sort of, what's it now, mid £30 a bottle, I guess. So still, I think pretty good value for money. The old Forester, yeah, I'm not. I don't think I'm kind of warm to it as much as I do the Elijah Craig. It's certainly, like I said, not a bad bourbon at all. Pleasant enough, but I just think it kind of lacked the sort of a little bit of sweetness to kind of balance up that real intense bitterness, certainly on the finish. But you know, there you go. You may well disagree with me on that one, but I think this has been quite an interesting little tasting. So what's left to say is, you know, hopefully I'll see you again in the weeks and months of 2015, and good dramming and good afternoon.
Page of his